A lot of people use a fuse and a DC disconnect as their main battery shutoff, but I think I found something better. This is a heavy-duty DC breaker, and it simplifies your entire setup. Don't use cheap breakers like these. I will show you why later in the video. If we're using the typical setup with a fuse and a DC disconnect switch, you will need 6 lugs and 3 cables. But if you're using the breaker, you only need 4 lugs and 2 cables. That means less labor, fewer potential failure points, and a cleaner install. Let's break down the cost. A mega fuse will cost you $12 and a fuse holder $10. A DC disconnect switch $25. That's a total of $47, not including the extra cable you'll need in between. Now you might think an MRBF fuse is cheaper, but it comes in at $65 including the DC disconnect switch, which is actually more expensive. And the cost of this breaker is just $28 at the time of making this video. So using this setup is much cheaper than the other one. So let's take a look if this breaker is any good. Let's compare the breaker to the best fuses around, Class T and NH fuses. Let's look at the specs of the breaker first. The voltage rating is 500 volts DC, and the short circuit current interrupt rating, or ICC, is 20,000 amps. That short circuit current rating is important, especially for lithium batteries. As a rule of thumb, short circuit current can be 10x the battery capacity. So a 100 amp hour battery could deliver up to 1000 amps during a fault. And the circuit breaker needs to be able to break under that current. For comparison, a Class T fuse has a voltage rating of 125 volts DC and a short circuit current of 20,000 amps. An NH fuse has a voltage rating of 250 volts DC and a short circuit current of 25,000 amps. So this breaker performs at the same level Class T and NH fuses do. You can use this breaker with a 48 volt battery with a maximum of 2000 amp hours. So why not use a double pole breaker instead of a single pole breaker? Some people suggest using a double pole breaker to increase safety. But this only doubles the voltage rating, as you can see on the spec sheet. That's unnecessary here. This breaker already handles 500 volts DC. So for a 12, 24 or 48 volt battery bank, you're already covered with a single pole breaker. This is what comes in the box. It comes with multiple mounting options. They also have 16 mm square or 6 gauge lugs, but they are useless because the breaker requires a minimum of 35 mm or 2 gauge cables. This is how you mount the circuit breaker to the wall. As you can see, it sticks out quite far. But make sure you mount the breaker securely, because the switching mechanism takes quite some force. The terminals use an M8 hex bolt, so make sure your cable lugs match it. An M6 or an M10 lug won't fit. Here I got an M10 lug. It will fit the hex nut. But the space in between the walls is not big enough for the lug. As you can see, it's only 18 mm wide. Now let's compare it to a cheap breaker from Amazon or AliExpress. They look to have the same function, but these budget breakers often have lower voltage ratings, low short current ratings, no trip curves or any safety data. I've tested this one, and while they do trip, I don't trust them. I do trust well-known brands with published safety data, like Blue Sea Systems. We can see on their specifications that they are rated for 48 volt max. So we cannot use it with a 48 volt battery, where the maximum voltage is 58.4 volts. It has a short circuit current of 3000 amps at 28 volts. So even though Blue Sea is a reputable company, the DC breaker is only safe for a battery at 12 volts with a max of 500 amp hours or 24 volts and 300 amp hours. So unless the breaker you're using has safety data and trip curves, don't use it. Let me know in the comments if you have been using one of these no-brand breakers and if you had any problems with it. Let's test the trip curve of this 100 amp breaker. The curve looks like this. If we apply a current, double its rating, it should trip in between 30 to 250 seconds. So let's create a 200 amp load and record the time it takes to trip. Whenever the breaker trips, it makes me jump. So let's see if it does this time. And let's start the timer. And there you go, it just tripped and made me jump. And we have 1 minute 37 seconds, so that's in between the specs. I did a few other additional tests before making this video, and these are the numbers I came up with. So the breaker is in between specs. And when the breaker trips, you have to wait a while for the breaker to cool down. Then you have to manually reset it to the off position before switching it back on. And I believe it's to reset the spring inside. So now it's been 1 minute and let's see if I can reset the breaker. Turn it down first and then you can turn it back on. You can also manually trip the breaker pressing this button. But I only recommend it when you turn off the loads first. So if you're building an off-grid or backup power system and you want a cleaner, safer and a more affordable way to protect your system, this DC breaker is a great choice. And I will be using it from now on. I think you will like this video next. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one.